The room smelled of wood and wet dirt. Japanese women, scared from being caught, were led inside as the sun set. Their clothes were torn, their faces tired and afraid. They thought they'd find darkness, cold, maybe chains on the ground. Instead, they saw rows of wooden beds with thin mattresses and folded blankets. This surprised them. It seemed almost normal. But then came a bigger surprise. As the women stood nervously by the beds, American soldiers walked in with their bags. Without waiting, they put blankets on the floor and sat, ready to sleep in the same room. The women felt scared. Whispers started. Would they be shamed or hurt? Their leaders had said being caught meant disgrace, that American men were cruel and would take their respect away. But the soldiers did nothing. They set down their guns, took off their jackets, and lay on the floor next to the beds. A few talked quietly to each other, their voices soft, tired, almost like they didn't care. The women watched, frozen with fear. Every move the men made seemed scary, even if it wasn't. One soldier took off his shoes and sighed happily. Another leaned against his bag and closed his eyes. Still, no orders came, no harm happened. Instead of being separate, guards and prisoners shared the same quiet, the same room, the same night. A nurse near the door held her blanket tightly. She was ready to fight or resist, but nothing happened. The soldiers lay still, falling asleep like tired workers after a long day. The sound bothered her most, the soft breathing of the Americans. In her mind, these were enemies, killers, but now their breathing filled the room like a gentle song. She wondered, if they were really monsters, why would they sleep so close without fear? Why not lock us in a different room? The question troubled her more than any loud command. Around her, other women whispered, their voices shaky. What do they want? One asked. Another shook her head quietly. No one knew. The nurse felt strange as she lay down. She was more scared of the quiet than of any harm, because the quiet made her see something worse than cruelty. She saw the Americans trusted them, and trust, she knew, was something her leaders never gave. That first night, lying awake with American soldiers sleeping just a few feet away, she felt her world change. The war had taught her to expect fear. Instead, being captured gave her confusion. The night grew colder. The walls creaked as wind pushed against them, carrying a faint smell of wood smoke from a far-off fire. Inside, the quiet grew deeper. The women lay stiff on their beds, blankets pulled tight. Their eyes moved to the shadows where the Americans slept. Some soldiers snored softly, others moved in their sleep, their guns neatly stacked against the wall. Whispers spread among the women, quick and worried. It's a trick, one hissed. They'll hurt us before morning, another said. The words carried the fear their training had taught them. Their code had not prepared them for this, an enemy sleeping so close, so calm. Their leaders had warned them Americans were harsh, their camps full of cruelty. But here nothing happened. The nurse, who had a bandage from earlier, pressed her face into the rough pillow, listening to the men breathe. They sounded tired, not dangerous, but doubt stayed heavy in her chest. One soldier moved, turning onto his side. The sound of his clothes was loud in the tense room. Every woman froze, hearts racing. But the man just settled back into sleep, sighing softly, as if he didn't notice their fear. Minutes felt like hours. Some women kept their eyes open, watching the shadows. Others pretended to sleep but shook under their blankets. No guard gave orders. No punishment came. Only the quiet rhythm of shared tiredness. The difference troubled them. If the Americans meant harm, why wait? Why give food earlier, or bandages, or warm beds? Nothing matched what their leaders had said. Slowly, the worry turned into a new question, whispered silently across the beds. What if they aren't what we were told? That thought was dangerous, almost wrong. To think the enemy could be human was to go against years of belief. But in the dark, with only steady breathing and quiet as proof, the question wouldn't go away. The nurse turned her head slightly. In the dim light, she saw one soldier sleeping with an arm across his chest, his face softened by tiredness. He looked less like a monster, more like a brother or a farmer from her village. Her heart beat harder at the thought. Not from fear, but from the scary idea that she saw him as human. She closed her eyes, ashamed, but couldn't forget the image. That night she didn't sleep. She lay awake between two worlds, the one she was taught and the one she saw, and as the hours passed, her doubt didn't fade. It turned into something more troubling: curiosity. What else was a lie? The first light of morning came through the wooden walls. Roosters crowed faintly from a nearby farm, mixing with the sound of boots outside. The women stirred, rubbing sleep from their tired eyes. They stood slowly, expecting harsh orders or punishment for something they didn't know. But when they looked around, they stopped. The American soldiers were still there, rolling up their blankets, tightening belts, yawning like men after a long day. Not one had touched the women during the night. Not one had said a cruel word. They had just slept, sharing the same room like it was normal. For the women, it was anything but normal. Their leaders had said the Americans would treat them like objects, worse than animals. But here they were, waking beside men who looked at them with no anger, only the same tired feeling every soldier has at dawn. One guard stretched his arms, glanced at the women, and gave a small nod before stepping outside. Another laughed softly as he put on his shoes, saying something in English the women didn't understand. His voice, though, was clear. It had no hate. The nurse sat on the edge of her bed, looking at her hands. She had prepared all night for harm, shame, or mockery. Instead, she got silence. The lack of cruelty hit her harder than cruelty would have. Beside her, another woman whispered, "Why did they sleep here?" The question stayed in the air. No one could answer. Breakfast came next, plates of eggs, bread, and hot coffee. The guards ate the same food, sitting next to their captives. No special food, no separation. The women stared, shocked, their doubt breaking with each bite. Still, worry stayed. Was this kindness real, or just the start of some hidden cruelty? They didn't know. But when the nurse lifted her coffee, the warm bitterness went down her throat, and she realized something scary. She wanted to believe it was real. That morning, the women looked at each other, not with fear but with confusion. They had survived the first night unharmed, and in that survival was a new danger: doubt. Because if the Americans weren't monsters, what else was a lie? The war went on outside, but inside the room, the biggest fight was in their minds. The room fell into a pattern over the next days. At night, the Americans spread their blankets on the floor, and the women went to their beds. By morning, they all woke together, the routine repeating like a clock. But each time it felt stranger. The women had prepared for cruelty. Instead, they shared silence, meals, and sleep under the same roof as the men they were taught to fear most. Doubt lingered. One woman tucked her blanket tightly around herself each night, sure the guards were waiting for the right moment. Another whispered prayers, asking for strength against shame. But the shame never came. The Americans laughed quietly among themselves, shared cigarettes, and fell asleep without looking at the women. The normalness troubled the captives. The nurse watched them closely. One soldier always took off his shoes carefully, placing them neatly by his side before lying down. Another slept curled on his bag, arms crossed, his face young in the dim light. They didn't look like enemies. They looked normal. That thought was dangerous. To see them as human was to go against everything she was taught. Yet each night, as fear didn't happen, her belief started to fade. Trust didn't come easily. When one soldier coughed in his sleep, the women jumped in panic. When another moved, several froze in fear. But the moments passed, and nothing happened. The silence became louder than words. It forced questions into their minds. If these men were enemies, why did they sleep so openly in the same room? Why lie down beside women they captured? The answer was clear but unspoken. The Americans didn't see them as threats. And in that quiet way, there was a strange kind of respect, a sign they were human, not objects. For the women, the difference was hard to bear. They expected cruelty but got indifference mixed with bits of kindness. The war promised monsters. Instead, they found tired young men who just wanted to sleep. The nurse lay awake one night, staring at the ceiling. She realized fear had turned into something more dangerous. Curiosity. What did these soldiers think of them? Did they see them as enemies or just women caught in the same war? No answer came, only the steady breathing in the dark. But for the first time, she fell into an uneasy sleep, not from tiredness, but from the quiet thought that maybe captivity wasn't the end she was taught to fear. It was something stranger, a world where enemy and prisoner slept side by side, and the lines between them blurred a little more each night. By the end of the first week, the silence in the room had changed. What started as fear-filled tension now had a hint of something else, an awareness that both sides were watching each other more closely. The women whispered less at night. Instead, their eyes followed the soldiers as they laid out their blankets. They noticed how one man rubbed his head before lying down, how another said a quiet prayer in English. The Americans, too, began to notice. They saw the quick glances from the beds, the way the women tensed when someone moved in sleep. Some soldiers smiled, not mocking, but amused by the nervousness that stayed despite so many safe nights. The nurse felt the weight of those looks more than anyone. She remembered one evening when a soldier yawned, stretched, and accidentally met her eyes across the dim room. For a moment, neither moved. Then he gave a small, almost sorry smile before turning over. Her chest tightened. It wasn't cruelty or power. It was a sign he saw her. That small smile troubled her more than a gun could. Around her, the other women whispered their own thoughts. "They sleep like us," one said. Another added, "One snores louder than my father." Nervous laughter came, real but shaky. It surprised them as much as any kindness. Each night became a kind of silent talk. The women listened to the sound of American snores, the rustle of blankets, the occasional tired sigh. The men seemed to sense the women's fear softening, though no words passed between them. This strange closeness, born not of touch or talk but of being near, grew every day. They were enemies, yet they shared the same walls, the same air, the same fragile moment of sleep. For the nurse, it was unbearable. She wanted to hate them as she was taught. Yet night after night, she heard their breathing, steady and human. Each time, her certainty slipped further. One evening, as a soldier took off his shoes and winced at a sore spot, she thought of her brother, who had walked barefoot in the war. The thought hurt. She gripped her blanket and turned away, but it stayed. Enemies or not, these men weren't so different from those she loved and lost. That truth scared her more than fear ever could. Because in the quiet of those nights, she wasn't just surviving. She was starting to see the humanity in her captors. The sixth night started like the others. The soldiers came in after their work, setting down guns and blankets with the same quiet routine. The women went to their beds, pulling blankets tight, pretending not to watch. But something changed that night. One soldier dropped a small metal cup onto the wooden floor. The loud noise echoed, startling everyone into silence. Then, suddenly, one woman let out a short, nervous laugh. It slipped out before she could stop it, half from tension, half from the silliness. She covered her mouth, eyes wide, as if she'd done something wrong. The soldier paused, looked at the cup, then at her. Instead of anger, he grinned shyly, shrugged, and picked it up. To everyone's surprise, he gave a playful little bow, as if laughing at his own mistake. The room filled with quiet laughter, first from the women, then even from the soldiers. For the first time, the two groups shared a sound that wasn't fear or doubt, but something human. The nurse sat still, her heart racing. Laughter in captivity felt wrong, forbidden. Yet she couldn't stop the small smile on her lips. It was as if the air had changed, lighter now, less heavy. After that night, the silence in the room was different. It no longer felt heavy. Instead, it carried a hint of possibility. The women whispered less about danger and more about curiosity. The soldiers, too, seemed to relax, their movements less careful. Small moments followed. One woman sneezed in the dark, and a soldier said something in English that sounded like, "Bless you." Another night, a guard hummed a tune, unfamiliar but calming. Each small act chipped away at the wall between captor and captive. The women still feared shame. The soldiers still carried guns. But beneath those roles, something real stirred. Recognition. The nurse lay awake long after the laughter faded, staring at the ceiling. She realized she was no longer waiting for cruelty. She was waiting for something else, something she didn't dare name. For the first time since her capture, she wondered, what if kindness could exist, even here behind the wire? The thought scared her because if kindness was possible, everything she was told about the enemy might be a lie, and that was more dangerous than any weapon. The next night, the air was very still. Crickets buzzed outside, and the room glowed faintly under a lantern. The women settled into their beds uneasily, while the soldiers spread their blankets on the floor as usual. But one soldier, young, with light hair, did something surprising. As he opened his bag, he pulled out a small leather wallet. Instead of hiding it, he set it openly on the floor beside his blanket. The women saw it instantly, their eyes wide. A wallet, personal, valuable, maybe with money or photos, left where captives could reach it. It was unthinkable. Their own leaders would have punished them for such carelessness. The soldier didn't seem worried. He stretched, said something to his friend, and lay down with his arm over his eyes. Soon his breathing slowed into sleep. Whispers spread through the beds. "It's a trick," one woman hissed. Another shook her head, watching the wallet shine faintly in the light. No one dared touch it, yet all felt what it meant. Trust, or at least the look of it. The nurse couldn't look away. She imagined reaching for it, imagined the soldier waking to punish her. But nothing happened. He slept deeply, unafraid, as if sure none of them would take it. That act troubled her more than any gun. It suggested these men didn't see the women as enemies ready to act, but as people capable of holding back. When morning came, the wallet was still there. The soldier picked it up casually, glanced at something inside, and tucked it back into his bag. For a moment, the nurse saw a photo. 2 children smiling, their faces soft and innocent. Her chest tightened. This enemy carried memories of home, just like she did in her mind. Family, siblings, people to protect. He wasn't just a guard. He was someone's son, maybe a father. The realization spread among the women. The Americans weren't just captors. They were men who trusted, who remembered, who carried love in their pockets. That night changed things. No one said it out loud, but every woman felt it. The wall between them cracked more, not through words, but through the simple, scary power of trust. Once trust entered the room, even in small ways, nothing felt the same. One night, rain fell hard on the roof, making a steady, calming sound. The women huddled under their blankets, listening, while the soldiers moved restlessly on their blankets. The nurse lay awake, looking at the ceiling when she heard it. A soft voice in English, closer than usual. A soldier was sitting up, looking toward the beds. At first, she thought he was talking to another guard. But then his words, slow and unsure, reached her clearly. "You safe. No harm." The women froze. They knew little English, but those words were clear. Safe. No harm. Their breaths stopped together. The soldier paused, rubbing his neck, almost shy, as if unsure if they understood. Then, quieter, he added, "Sleep. Okay." The nurse's heart raced. No one moved. Then, to her surprise, the oldest woman among them gave a small nod, holding her blanket tighter. The soldier breathed out softly, as if relieved, and lay back down. The silence that followed was different from any other night. It wasn't heavy or full of doubt. It was heavy with the echo of words that couldn't be taken back. The nurse turned toward the soldier's shadow. She had prepared for cruelty, threats, or shame. Instead, she got comfort. The difference was almost too much. Whispers spread once the lights dimmed. "Did you hear?" one woman murmured. Another said, "He said we're safe." Their voices shook with disbelief, as if saying it might break the moment. The nurse stayed quiet, her chest tight. She didn't trust easily, but the words stayed in her mind. Safe, no harm. For years, she believed capture meant shame, dishonor, or worse. Yet here, the enemy himself told her she could rest. She closed her eyes, unsure whether to feel relief or fear. But in the end, sleep came easier than ever in captivity, because for the first time, the silence carried not just doubt but the fragile start of trust. Days passed, but the nights changed most. What was once heavy silence full of doubt slowly became something else. The women still held their blankets tight, still avoided looking at the soldiers sleeping nearby. But the tension wasn't as sharp. It softened bit by bit. They began to notice small things. How the Americans turned away when the women changed clothes. How one soldier coughed quietly at night to not disturb them. The younger women whispered about it in the dark. "They're not what we were told." The nurse listened but said nothing. Yet even she felt her fear fading. One evening, a soldier set his gun aside before lying down, placing it against the far wall on purpose. The act was clear. "I'm not here to scare you tonight." The women looked at each other, eyes wide. For warriors taught to always keep weapons close, this was unthinkable. But the Americans did it calmly, easily. Slowly, the women realized the soldiers' presence made them feel safer. Not from the Americans, but from the unknown. Outside, the night held dangers, storms, hunger, maybe men who didn't follow rules. Inside, with these guards sleeping nearby, there was order, predictability, even kindness. The nurse, lying on her narrow bed, watched a soldier's chest rise and fall as he slept. His face, relaxed in the dim light, looked younger than she thought, almost boyish. Her thoughts surprised her. This was the enemy. Yet he had bandaged her arm, said safe. And now, in this strange shared silence, he was just another person breathing through the night. Whispers of dreams came next. One woman said she dreamed less of home and more of the camp. Another admitted the sound of American snores comforted her because it meant the men were human, not monsters. The nurse kept quiet, but in her heart, she knew something dangerous had started. Trust, fragile and unwanted, was growing. By the time the lights went out that night, the lines between prisoner and guard, enemy and protector, had blurred just enough for both sides to feel it. They weren't equals or friends, but they weren't strangers either. Morning light came through the cracks in the walls, painting thin lines across the floor. The women woke first, adjusting blankets that smelled faintly of soap and smoke. For a moment, they forgot where they were. The warmth, the quiet, the steady breathing around them felt almost like home. But then they saw the guns stacked against the wall, the uniforms on nearby beds, and reality returned. The Americans woke slowly, stretching sore shoulders, rubbing tired eyes. Their movements were simple, not threatening, almost like family. No harsh orders, no loud commands, just men waking to another day. The women looked at each other. Something unspoken hung between them. They had survived another night, not in fear, but in uneasy peace. The nurse, her arm still bandaged from the medic's care, whispered one word under her breath: alive. She hadn't realized until now that she'd stopped expecting to survive each day. But here she was, alive, fed, even safe. The soldiers noticed the change, too. They no longer saw only fear in the women's eyes. There were sparks of curiosity, even recognition. One soldier nodded at a woman as she sat up, and though she didn't reply, she didn't look away either. Breakfast was called. As the women lined up, one guard whispered to another, "They're starting to trust us." The words meant more than he knew. For the women, the shock wasn't that the Americans slept beside them. It was that the world didn't end because of it. Their honor was safe, their bodies unharmed, their dignity oddly kept. This truth was more troubling than any cruelty could have been. Cruelty would have matched the stories they were told. Kindness challenged them. When the nurse sat with her breakfast tray, she looked at the eggs and bread, then at the men guarding them, then at her own hands. The world she believed in before capture was falling apart bit by bit. The Americans didn't see this struggle. For them, it was just another morning in another camp. But for the women, dawn brought more than light. It brought questions that would never leave. How could enemies show such humanity? And if they weren't monsters, what did that make the war? The answers wouldn't come that day or soon after. But the memory of those nights, when American soldiers slept beside them, not as conquerors but as men forever.